We're live.
Good morning. Hello, Americas. Good morning to all of you, either in the United States or as well in Brazil and Latin America as a whole. Good afternoon for Europe and good evening for Asia. Thank you very much for being with us on board on this May 25th, last and final webinar towards the future of contracting, an event that will take place on the 27th and 28th of May. I am Carol Renaud. I'm Chief Business Development Officer at Legal Creatives. I'm a mother, a wife, and a teacher here in Brazil. It's special and rewarding to have so many of you here, not the least in these disruptive and chaotic, difficult times. Today in the studio, we have Claudia Costin, who is the founder and director of the Center for Innovation and Excellence in Education Policies, a think and do tank within Fundação Getúlio Vargas, or Getúlio Vargas Foundation, a leading private university in Brazil where she is a professor. Claudia was until 2018 a visiting professor at the Harvard School of Education. Prior to founding the CEPI, she was a senior director for global education at the World Bank. Before joining the World Bank, Costin served as a secretary of education at Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. Her former positions include Secretary of Culture, São Paulo State, and Federal Minister for Public Administration and State Reform. She has also held academic positions at the Catholic University of São Paulo, Getúlio Vargas Foundation in São Paulo, INSPER Institute of Education, and research in École Nationale d'Administration Publique in Quebec. Also in 2018, she joined the Global Commission for the Future of Work at the International Labour Organization. I'm going to start and hand over to Pierre Dixon, founder and CEO of Sky Contracts, and Tessa Manuela, founder and CEO of Legal Creators. Pierre, please tell us a bit about yourself and what exactly Future of Contracting is.
Thank you, Carol. Thank you. It's absolutely amazing to be in a studio like this and to be able to pull off great things like this. And thank you, Claudia, for being here. And of course, thank you, Magnus, for being there always, the brainiac behind all what we are trying to achieve. We haven't achieved it all yet, but we are certainly going to. And thank you, Tessa, for meeting you in Munich a while ago. And you taught me the inner spirit of design thinking that I've tried to apply ever since. And not the least, Carol. Thanks. Anyway, Sky Contracts, which I'm heading, it's an initiative 3 years ago, and it's an initiative that was based on like working in the backyard for a long time. In my case, I'm a financial and legal guy, but at the end of the housing, being the chief legal counsel for a number of international IT consultancy businesses, I figured that I have actually made use of more of my experience and insights from the military sector, which is where I spent all in all 4 years. It's really about collaboration, teamwork, and communication. You may not think about that all the time, but that is really one of the first and foremost reasons why people actually get to know each other as a team, and we can create teams within 3 months, the regular boot camp style, which is never heard of in the regular society, unfortunately. And Swedish armed forces are a really friendly one, and it's compulsory. So in these days, we all had to go through it more or less. So we are nothing special. We are just ordinary people that makes up the armed forces here. Anyway, future work. I think that the whole collaboration thing is totally underestimated. We have created silos for such a long time, so we don't even reflect on it. So we really don't collaborate for real. We rather misunderstand each other and try to negotiate. And we are kind of experts in generating conflicts also as individuals. And that's a little bit sad angle of the human mankind. So I think for that reason, the whole session here with you, Claudia, and this warm up for the conference at the end of this, or Wednesday, Thursday here, is simply great. Future of contracting, something short about that. It's really an independent platform for the debate. Sometimes the debate is perfectly run out of the institutions. Sometimes the institutions need like a complementary side of the debate. And we know that for sure when it comes to the legal sector. But so we are trying to contribute in our way in what we could do. And certainly in these days when everybody starts to learn to know how to use the digital tools to pull together like great lessons or lectures and whatever. So I think there are so many flip sides of COVID situation, but this is actually one of the sort of the eye openers. We are able to pull off some great stuff. So yeah, again, thanks for being here, and yeah, back to you, Carol or Tessa.
All right. Yes, I'd like to add a few words to what you just said, Pierre. And I'm really looking forward to hear the presentation from Claudia and the future of work, because I think this is no longer the future. This is the present now. We need to cope with really difficult situations that have been brought by the COVID-19 in the workplace. Everything we thought was something we could not change, now it's changing. Now we have virtual workforces. We have different schedules. We work using different tools online. So I'm really looking forward to hear what Claudia has to say about, the big picture of the challenges and the opportunities as well. But really, I think what it's really about is about being, I believe, flexible, to adapt and to be resilient, because on the path to success into navigating this crisis, we have to let go of certain beliefs, and we have to let go of certain traditions. So how are we gonna make sure also we are working in safe places and in places where employees feel, they can really explore their own potential, and an organization can at least sustain themselves, but also potentially thrive. So I'm really looking forward to the conversation and to see how creativity can help, because as you know, at Lego Creatives, we're all about creative thinking, creative problem solving, and using it in the context of law. But I really look forward to see how those elements plays for the future of work. So I'm handing back to Carol.
Thank you, Tessa. Thank you, Pierre. Thank you, Magnus. Thank you, Professor Claudia. We'll be having the privilege and the honor to hear Professor Claudia Costin for the following minutes. Please feel free to present your questions in the chat. I will be the moderator for the Q&A, and after she has finished her presentation, we'll be very happy to have this moment of constructive dialogue and creative problem solving and learning abilities here. Thank you, Professor.
Okay, so very happy to be here with you. I'm coming from a perspective of education, how to prepare the next generation, not only for the future of work, but for the time they are living right now. So with that point, I will start my presentation. I'm very happy to be with you all. So what I'm going to discuss right now is how the future of work connects to a future of education, with an emphasis on the developing world, where I come from and where I have worked most of my professional life. So if we can start, next slide. Somebody is, yes. I will start from an important moment in September of 2015, when 194 countries have agreed on global goals for 2030, the sustainable development goals. And one of them was that we would ensure inclusive and quality education for all and promote lifelong learning. For those of you who come from the developed world, you may imagine the challenge, because in many parts of the developing world, access is still a big issue. What to say about quality? And what to say about quality for the 21st century, where the future of work is a big issue. So it's not enough anymore to deliver on basic skills, but we have to deal with much more sophisticated skills to ensure that people either are employable or able to be entrepreneurs or work with startups. So this was an important moment, and this this SDG 4, which I have already presented, is included like 10 targets. I'm going to present just 2 of them or 3 of them. Next. So one of the targets that we have set for ourselves as a planet is that by 2030, which means in 10 years, we would ensure that all girls and boys complete free, equitable, and quality primary and secondary education, which means in the US till the end of high school, and in Europe, upper secondary, leading to relevant and effective learning outcomes, which means that it's not enough to say that there is quality, but we have to show that kids are learning what is important for the time they are living right now, that are relevant for employability, for entrepreneurship, for thriving in the 21st century. The next one is about quality early childhood development. There is enough research that shows that if kids are provided quality early childhood development, care, and pre-primary, they will have better life outcomes, such as non-involvement with crime, having good citizenship, participating in society in a much better way. Thanks Heckman, the Nobel Prize in economy from some years ago, for developing the research that showed how important this is. Next one, please. And the third and last one that I'm going to show you is that we have agreed that by 2030, we would substantially increase the number of youth and adults who have relevant skills, including technical and vocational skills, either for employment, decent jobs, and entrepreneurship. So you might discuss, if we have agreed to provide all the kids that are in schools with relevant skills, why are we talking about increase the number of youth and adults who have relevant skills? It's because no one should be left behind. This means not only in schools preparing them for the future of work, but the present cohort of young people who have already finished schools or have left schools without completion should also be skilled, upskilled, reskilled for the world we are going to live in. So I now start to talk about the challenges that the future brings, especially to the developing world. One of them I have already mentioned, the Revolution 4.0 or the future of work, automation and robotization with massive jobs extinction. Osborne and Frey from Oxford mentioned that by 2030, almost 2 billion job posts will be extinct. That doesn't mean that no new jobs will be created. Like in previous industrial revolutions, certainly new jobs will be created, but not for the same skills. And a huge transition cost will need to be paid by societies. Another issue that affects the developing world is that reshoring of companies is predicted to happen and is in fact happening right now. Why? Because it's cheaper to produce goods back home at the headquarters of the companies through automation. So cheap work is not anymore such an important competitive advantage. There is a growth in inequality expected to happen, and it's already happening in many of our countries. Inequality is an issue all over the world, but in Latin America, it was decreasing for a while. Now it has started to grow again. In many of the developing countries, one exception is still Africa, many of the countries in Africa, is a rapidly fading demographic bonus. Just to give you an example from my country, we now have a fertility rate of 1.7 kids per woman in fertile years. This is below reposition rate. So it's an issue. The demographic bonus is not, won't be there very shortly. Stagnated productivity in many countries, including in mine, which connects to low quality schools. And last but not least, fragile citizenship, which brings populisms. And populism, it doesn't matter if it is from the right or from the left wing, is always bad for countries. Next. So let me just show you what we are living presently and is challenging our countries to even think about bringing about an education that is fit for the 21st century. Learning is not happening in many countries from the developing world. I bring you data from PISA, which is an exam that is organized by OECD for the last one, the 2018 one, for 79 economies or 80 economies. So how is the developing world doing in PISA? Latin America and the Caribbean was positioned at the bottom third of the PISA ranking. So why are we performing so poorly? Part of the explanation is that many of the countries provided access to basic education very late in the 20th century. Even Brazil is one of the worst cases. We universalized access to lower secondary at the first 10 years of the 21st century. So we were late. We were even later than Argentina, for example, in providing access to basic education. Africa does not participate in PISA, yet Morocco is an exception, but it's also positioned in very low position in the PISA ranking, 73rd among 79 economies. But what happens in the developing countries is that we have huge inequalities in education. It's not only that kids are not learning, but the richest kids perform much better than the lowest quartile in income. But the fact that there is such a distance doesn't mean that they perform greatly, because it's the same low attractiveness of the teaching careers. Let me go to the next. So what are the main problems that those countries face in education? The lack of attractiveness of the teaching career, difficulty to attract the best teachers, best students from secondary schools to the teaching profession. Second, that the teachers receive their pre-service education in tertiary, but often in a course that overemphasizes the pillars of education and does not prepare for the profession. Let me be clearer. While future doctors, future physicians are prepared to the profession, being present at a hospital, a university hospital, since first year of their careers, teachers in many of those countries do not even have to have an internship, and they learn just theory. The other point is that traditional teaching is not capturing students' interests, even in the developing world. Because in a way or another, those students are immersed in technology, even if it is only from their mobile phones or social networks and not for learning. So traditional teaching is not capturing student interest, but there is a digital divide that affects teachers even more than students. And disengagement is present in most secondary schools. There is a high repetition rate because teachers were not prepared to teach for all students. They were prepared to teach for the students that are motivated or come from a literate background. And there is another issue that PISA shows, the PISA data show, is that young people are not convinced that education will bring them a brighter future. And a very low coverage of early childhood programs among the poorest, which could be had an equalizing effect. So continuing with the problems that we face in education to be ready for the 21st century and for the future of work, technical schools, which might be an interesting way to be present at the discussions or at the table of the 21st century, has very low coverage. In Brazil, for example, is 8.5% of the high schoolers that opt to the technical schools route. And it's very divorced from the needs of the countries and especially of the labor market. Very reduced hours of instruction. In Brazil, 4 hours on average. In Argentina, 5 hours on average, included recess and lunchtime and so on. We have among the teachers, a strong prejudice against standards and techniques in the process of teaching and learning. So all this discussion on active methodologies of teaching, on problem solving strategies with creativity is not very well seen among the teacher's force, the teaching force. A little emphasis on experimentation and problem solving. So what will be, I believe, now coming back to the word and not the developing word, the education ecosystem for the future. It will be changed in the developed world and in the developing world, even if we don't want it to happen. Next slide. So first, what will happen with the job posts? Job posts will go extinct. Not necessarily entire professions, and not necessarily all the job posts at once, or certainly not all the job posts at once. It will be in successive waves. And being extinct in successive waves, it will demand from the human being not only the need to adapt, but to reinvent oneself. So we will need, yes, regular schools will survive. TVET, technical and vocation schools will survive. Universities will survive, but they will be combined with skills counseling agencies that will guide students and professionals throughout their lifelong learning journey, because we will need to reinvent ourselves very often. The new ecosystem will also comprise global education platforms. So this kind of hybrid education will happen everywhere. And we will be able to take courses in Sweden, even at high school level, or in Spain, or in Africa, depending on what we are trying to achieve and how we are trying to reinvent oneself. And learning experiences will have different durations and intensities. It's not now we are going to take a tertiary course or higher education course of 5 years, and then some years later, the master, and then the PhD. Now we are going to take courses that might be 2 years of university, then after that 3 months course, depending on what we want to achieve as a new profession or a new activity, trying to put in place, for example, a startup. Mentoring, coaching, and collaborative work will be valuable sources of learning. We learn not only in schools, we learn in different places. In work, it's a reality, and we learn through colleagues, through peers. This is already a reality and was a reality in the past, but this will increase. Digital communities of professional learning, through skills counseling, discovering ways of learning with a mentor that might advise us on how to progress in our careers. And learners will have to be autonomous. If there is one skill that basic education should teach children, is to be autonomous learners. Learning to learn became one of the most important skills. More than learning content is learning to learn, reinventing ourselves. Yet also, it sounds weird, but it sounds that there is a tension in learning to be autonomous and being able to collaborate, but only an entire human being, a human being that feels able to think by him or herself, is able to collaborate at full speed. So this is something that will be very important for the future. Next one, please. So what are, in summary, the education trends for the future? First one was already mentioned before I started to talk: focus in collaborative problem solving with creativity. This is the most important skill for the future. Another one in schools is personalization. Is this idea that a school should have different grades and that you evolve in your learning through pre-formatted steps has been changed because of adaptive platforms, where you can easily identify the gaps in learning of each student and direct him or her to the learning that needs to happen. Let me give you a very easy example. If here in Brazil, in one of our last exams, we learned that 65% of kids in 9th grade, which is the part of the last year of junior secondary or lower secondary, are unable to understand percentages. So you can, if this happens in an adaptive platform, you can learn, for example, that the kid does not understand percentages because he or she is not good at fractions. So you can teach her exactly what she doesn't know and not make her repeat grades or repeat lots of math just because she doesn't know exactly that point. So this is something that is already happening in education. We have to put it at scale. Curricular flexibility. You don't learn to be flexible and adaptive if you have a curriculum that is very, very, very structured. A change in the role of the teacher. Presently, most teachers in the developing world are classes provider. They present a speech to their students and they take notes on their notebooks. Now they are becoming much more learning insurers. Some people say, well, they should become moderators. No, they are not moderators. It's much more important than that. They have to make sure that every kid with high expectations for all learn to be adaptive and learn to be able to reinvent himself and herself and to learn to think by himself or herself. So teaching to think, to prototype solutions, and deep learning, not lots of content, but to be able to utilize knowledge, to use knowledge in solving concrete problems will be a very important skill, not only for basic education, but even for higher education. Promoting a digital culture. It's not enough to learn to navigate in Twitter or Facebook. It's important to acquire a culture where one can judge what is written on social networks or on newspapers. Digital literacy became an important tool. While teaching sophisticated literacy, not only basic literacy. Cognitive skills are still important, but they need to be associated with social and emotional skills. So resilience is important, as was mentioned at the beginning before I started to speak. Resilience is important, persistent is important, as grit, and empathy, which is a basis, which is what makes us human. I'm going to extend myself on that later. And student agency. There is a very interesting paper from the OECD that says that one attitude that became very important for students presently is being able to be the entrepreneur of your own life, to understand that even if you have challenges in your life, you bear dreams, you have dreams of future, and it's up to you to plan your own life, which is easy to say, hard to do, but that's why a lot of learning has to happen and mentoring on that front. But also on preparing global citizens that understand that you are part of connected communities, or your school community, your local community, up to the planet community, the global community. Next. So this is just some reflection that I did on what makes us different from robots. Because if robots are challenging our job posts, what makes us different from the robots? What is specifically human in us? Empathy, certainly. And it's important to teach them, not only as a class on empathy, but teachers and professors should be role models on empathy. Many teachers bully their students, but there are techniques even in literature. Humanities is very important for teaching empathy, and literature is one door or one tool to teach empathy. Persistence and grit is very important, especially when you deal with vulnerable kids. This is teachable, as Carol Dweck, a very cognitive psychologist who won one of the most important prizes in education, has shown us. Resilience is important. And it takes an interesting approach in education, showing that mistakes are part of our learning, and you recover from your mistakes. You cannot be blamed or name tagged as somebody who has not the talents to thrive in life just because you made some mistakes in life or in school. Critical thinking. Robots are unable to be critical thinkers or abstract thinking. And we don't, as we teach either to the test or we teach to make through rote learning, kids are not able to develop abstract thinking or systemic thinking abilities. Self-regulation can be taught, and self-regulation is very important not only for work, but for living in society. Some politicians should learn some self-regulation nowadays, very needed. Curiosity, creativity, and imagination is, when I read Walter Isaacson book on Leonardo da Vinci life, I was amazed by his curiosity, creativity, and imagination. And I thought, this is what makes us different from robots. My hero, my anti-robot hero, is Leonardo da Vinci. And certainly entrepreneurship and student agency, as I mentioned before. Next one, please. So I will skip that one because I think I'm running out of time. Being a teacher in times of change, I already mentioned some of this. Next one. So what about COVID-19? Next one. So what are we living right now? As some countries have already started reopening schools, we still have 170 countries with school partially or totally closed. That means 1.5 billion students with no in-school learning. Almost 90% of the students of the world. Next one. So what are they doing right now, and how can this affect the future of education? So there is an emergency distant learning using a combination of different media. So all the countries I'm discussing with, I participate in 2 webinars every week with different countries on education. So what they are doing is using a combination of different media, such as online. Yes, even in Africa, online is being used because they believe that even if it affects or it is present in 40% of the homes only, it's a good way to prepare teachers for the future they will face. TV is being very used because TV enters most of the homes, especially in Latin America or in countries such as Kenya, Tanzania, and others. But printed study guides for the households where not even a TV enter, and radios are being used to provide guidance to parents. Parents in many of the countries, so it's already more than 2 months with kids at home. So they need to be advised on what to do. Teachers are talking virtually to children because one of the big risks that we face is that kids leave school after school is on again. So we are very worried, especially teenagers. So it's important to keep the link or the relationship alive with teachers and with schools. Emergency courses were provided to navigate in the digital world, for teachers to navigate in the digital world. And a plan is being prepared in many of those countries for the reopening of the schools, how to do it, which grades first, how to divide the classrooms so as not to have huge classes. Here in Latin America, many classrooms have 50 kids. So social distancing would be impossible. So they will probably divide classes. Some stay at home, then they switch, they change. Next one. So I will finish talking about my utopia. What is the school for the future that I dream of? I'm not saying that this is what is going to happen, but as somebody who is passionate, not only a specialist in education, but a passionate person about the power of education, I'm going to talk about my utopia. Next slide. So I dream of a school where everyone learns, where you can combine excellence with equity, not an amazing school for the very rich and a second line school for the poor, where they just stay not to be meddled in confusion or crime. A school that is not divorced from society. We cannot have a 19th century school at the 21st century. A school that is able to receive with flexible curricula the kids that have left it. A school where both students and teacher work collaboratively. It's not possible to teach students to develop collaborative problem-solving skills if the teachers don't work collaboratively. Teachers and even professors in universities. A school that teaches values and attitudes, not only content. A school that where knowledge is not fragmented. And here I'm inspired by Edgar Morin, a French philosopher, education philosopher, who developed a very interesting proposition for reinventing upper secondary in France. And he said that in schools presently, knowledge is fragmented and kids don't learn the connections, don't build connections. A school that teaches and learns how to think, but also how to reinvent oneself. And a school that promotes student agency and autonomy. The old dream of Maria Montessori, of Dewey, and of Paulo Freire, a Brazilian education philosopher. Thank you very much. Next one, just to show my, and I will be very happy to discuss those ideas. And I put my Twitter there because I talk every day with passionate people passionate about education and teachers and professors. So if anyone is not able to put forward his or her question, don't, please send me through Twitter. I answer very, very quickly. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor. It was amazing to hear you, and I'm really looking forward to bring on some questions for this moment. Before I pass it on to my colleagues here, I would like to ask you for a parallel, please, a personal and professional parallel. Connecting the first time you did become a teacher. So which year was that? How was work in that year when you first entered the classroom to be a teacher? And what do you think was the role model of the teacher at that moment? And when was the last time you entered a classroom to be a teacher? Was it virtual? Was it physical? And if you can, bring on a bit of your history with this parallel of the first time, the work situation in that year, and the last time you were a teacher, please.
Okay. Sorry to be long in the answer, but I started as a teacher back in 1975, but let me explain what happened exactly. As a high schooler, I wanted to become a teacher. Since I was very young, I wanted to become a teacher. My mother was not able. She was a refugee in Brazil. She's Hungarian. She passed away. She was Hungarian, and she was a war refugee in Brazil. And she was not able to complete her lower secondary. And she was always saying to us, education is the most important thing. Nobody will steal from you what you have in your head. Many parents say that, my mother, but she did on a personal conviction. And so I wanted to become a teacher. But my father was a businessman. He had a small company, and he was preparing my brother to become his successor. So unfortunately, my brother died in a car accident. The year I was expected to prepare myself to take the exam to access the university to prepare to become a teacher. And so my father asked me, don't study pedagogy, study please business so that you are prepared to be my successor. Well, that was 3 days after my brother had died. So I was horrified I didn't want to become a business person. I thought that this was for bourgeois, and I didn't feel like a bourgeois. And so I decided to discover some way out. I asked for 3 days to think, and I discovered that Getúlio Vargas Foundation had a course on public administration. So I said to my father, well, I'm going to study administration. So he said, well, this is business. So he discovered that I was studying public administration 2 years after I started my studies. I loved public administration, and I discovered that I can be to go to education through public policies. But I started teaching in 1975 on my first year of university, teaching illiterate adults. So I was using Paulo Freire methodology to teach illiterate for almost 5 years. I was teaching them, and I loved every minute. And then I became later on a professor in university, and that was my approach. And I teach till now, and I'm also a mentor of young adults, young politicians, and young people who want to discover what to do about their careers, startup owners, or say, people like that. Okay.
Thank you. Tessa, Magnus, Pierre, please, do you have specific questions before I pass on another, please?
Okay. Future of contracting is a theme under which we are trying to focus the world in. But I'm thinking in terms of the education and the learning. As long as we educate people to contract, which is really about relations. Contracting is relations. As long as we're teaching people to maintain the old way of always doing things, which is it's the inner essence of law school, for instance. No matter what you say, that is the case actually. For as long as we educate people to not break new grounds when they are dealing with contracting, we sort of frame and we hinder all what you're talking about. What do you think about that?
It makes a lot of sense. When you deal with young people, and I will give you one example. When you deal with young people, not only in law schools, but even before that, it's very important to learn how to build rules, how to agree on how do you say, rules that are agreed upon and being set to be the way we will work together. They cooperate much better. So agreed upon rules is a way to foster healthy contracting. So we are establishing how we will work. And another way, and the example that I was going to give you is that when I was Secretary of Education of the city of Rio, we have lots of slums that are controlled by drug dealers there, unfortunately. And we had 155 schools that were located in those territories. So we developed, during the time I was secretary, a program called Schools of Tomorrow. Those schools of tomorrow, in addition to high expectations for everyone, mentoring and other supports, we decided to teach them something that showed very important, which was conflict mediation. First, establishing rules for living together, because in their territories, nobody was supposed to abide by the regular law. So there were other laws. It was like an occupied territory by the militias or the drug dealers. So what we established is teaching them that there are some rules that we agreed upon, and should conflict emerge, we should teach teachers to help, to show the kids how to mediate conflict, and also to compensate for the evil that they have done to their peers. So if somebody hit somebody or offends somebody in the school setting, they were made to compensate to the person and not be expelled from school, but to compensate for the misdoing. Why am I saying again about basic schooling and not law schools? Because it begins with that. If you don't learn these basic skills when you are at a young age, it makes it more difficult to learn it later on. It's not that it is impossible to learn, but it starts with that. The way we look at young people. In law schools, and I'm not a professor of law, but having studied public policies, you learn a lot about constitutional law, administrative law, and so on. I believe that humanities should play a much more important role than it plays right now. And one of them is going back to understanding that, yes, you have rights, but your rights end when the right of your fellow citizens starts, and that you can work together to build social rights that belong to all of us. Did I answer your question?
I think you did, and you brought us so much more.
Okay.
Thank you. Magnus, would you like to pose a specific question?
Yeah, so just a short question. Do you think that the current situation, the COVID situation, will help or hinder the developing world to get closer to the developed world?
Okay, I have a caveat. I am an optimist, even though I was saying that inequality will grow. I'm always an optimist. So part of my dreams connect with my excessive optimism. And yes, I think there are some lessons learned from the COVID crisis that might build into a better future. For example, I've never seen, and let me be more specific to my country, although I have seen it worldwide. You cannot imagine the wave of solidarity that is happening right now in Brazil, especially because of the poorest, people who are hungry, who lost their income or are not eating, anything like that. You can build on that. You can build on the digital inclusion that has developed right now through learning at home. You can build on reinforcing family ties, because people are being obliged to be at home to do some home office, and they have to discover new ways to share. Many families with whom I'm discussing, and I'm not talking about middle class families, they had a horrible first week, a nightmare in the second, and then links begin to be established. So a way of living together has been established. I don't know what, this is not based on research, but it's anecdotal evidence, but that's my perception. Yes, I think we will either live in a horrible world after that, or, as I imagine, a better world.
Thank you.
Thank you. Tessa, do you have a specific question before I hand one?
Well,
Please.
first of all, I want to say thank you for the presentation. I've really enjoyed it. All of the references and the insights from the future. It reminded me of some work I've read when I was doing research by the philosopher Martha Nussbaum. I would imagine you know her work.
Yes.
And she's an amazing philosopher from the US, I believe in Chicago, who has been advocating for how to build skills for the new citizen, to have stronger democracies as well. You need more critical thinkers and humans that are able to empathize with one another and to be able to create things, create new things, because the world needs new things now. And so I'm really interested to know how we can start to change the curriculum as well, because you are teaching, you're a professor, and especially in law school, the curriculum of, it's very strict, it's very strict. And so do you have any recommendation in order to start infusing those new methodologies that are experiential learning, deep learning, prototyping, working collaboratively in schools, since this is also probably one of your main job as well as a professor. So what are your tips for us?
Okay, so I think that the answer to that is, first, at university level, break the walls of the different departments. In universities, departments are like feudals, feudal, I forgot the word for that in English, but they are feudalized. They are siloed. And we need to bring in connections, which is very hard to do, because in universities, each department has a structure of power, and the power of each professor derives from his or her knowledge. And should the reality change, the professor very often feels menaced by the change in reality. And if everything that I research is shown a paradigm that has been surpassed. So it's important to break the walls. But breaking the wall means, how can it be achieved? Project-based learning is a good approach. So teaching, especially at undergraduate school, to work in projects that integrate different fields. And so you start focusing problem solving and in creativity and using your knowledge to think out of the box. So you can have a curricula. The curricula should be a little bit more flexible and adaptive, but you connect things through problems, either through project-based learning or problem-based learning. So through cases that are problematic. That, for me, makes a lot of sense.
Thank you. I have a question now, please. Professor, this comes from a perspective of being a woman, a teacher, and also a mother, as I know you are. So basically, a grandmother as well already.
Yes. 5.
There is a quote about certain situations regarding the education of men and the education of women. And Dr. James Agray says, open quote, "The surest way to keep people down is to educate the man and neglect the women. If you educate a man, you simply educate an individual. But if you educate a woman, you educate a whole nation." I know there are many ongoing projects worldwide about gathering a bit the entrance into upscaling or retraining women so that they, on one hand, can then be agents of change for their children as well. Can you elaborate on your ideas about, education for women globally? You have been in several forums that are very interesting for the analysis of this situation, and potentially as well post-COVID with this homeschooling thing going on as well, please.
Okay, I'll start with mentioning the last book of the Nobel Prize in Economics laureates Abhijit Banerjee and Esther Duflo. They were discussing lots of projects to emancipate the poor. And one of their reflections was a discussion on cash transfer systems. When you give money for the poor, conditional or unconditional cash transfer. And what they discussed is that if you give to the mother, everybody thinks that the outcome is that the money will go to feed the children. And if you give to the man, to the father, they will drink it up or something like that. And then she says, no, that's not what research has shown. The father and the mother, as research, deliver the money to either to the food, feeding the children, to the home, and to the education of the children, with a very low difference. But, and that's the conclusion that he brings, if you give the money to the mother, you have another outcome, which might be very interesting, because you empower the mother who lives in a very vulnerable landscape or in a very vulnerable situation. And she might see herself as somebody important because she's the one receiving the money. I'm talking about that because if educating the girls has lots of good outcome, or even just transferring money to them. First, because a fertility rate goes down, which is important for the future of the planet, not only. So fertility rate is important to go down. Second, because so she will have less children, and this Jeffrey Sachs has shown many times that the education of girls brings this outcome. You prepare her for a meaningful life, which is also, because it's not only about growing the economy. Life is about making us have meaningful lives. So it expands her horizon to have meaningful lives. And it's important, but it is important as well to make the case for more women employability. Last night, I was reading a book that is not already printed from a very young Brazilian politician who came from a slum, Tabata, you know who she is. So I'm her mentor already for 3 years, and she's now publishing the book explaining her life. And she says, yes, in Brazil, for example, and all over in Latin America, girls, not all over, exception of Peru and some other countries, girls study more years than boys. But when it comes to employability, this is not real. When it comes to being head of companies, this is not real. And when it comes to going into a political career, almost no woman is in Congress. And so she started a movement called Let's Go Together, incentivizing women to apply for a political career, to consider a political career and to learn how to do it, which I think it's a great idea. That's where civil society comes with good initiatives to foster equity, for example.
Thank you. So before we actually close up our great dialogue space, can you please give us a tip or recommendation on your perspective of how lawyers can be better for the world and for the work of the future and the education of the future? I know you have to deal with them and you potentially collaborate with some. So it would be great to hear your tips about what we should improve.
Okay, first, I know great lawyers. I have a daughter who is a lawyer. So there's so many jokes about lawyers not being able to go to heaven or something like that. You might know all of them. But I met many socially responsive lawyers. And I think one of the most important achievement of our society was building democracy. Democracy is so tough to build because consensus is never what exactly I wanted or you wanted. It's very, very tough. But law only makes sense when it is connected to a democracy, and it comes together with democracy. Let me tell you that I was in prison twice in Brazil during the dictatorship. So I have a personal bad experience with what dictatorships can do. And I can assure you that I never did anything violent. It was just based on what I think and not what I did. I didn't do anything bad to anybody. So my tip would be, first, be empathic, look at the others, don't think only about money. Money is a means to building purpose, but not the end in itself. So be empathic and help educating through your work a new generation of lawyers. Algorithms will substitute some lawyers, but not the lawyers who are able to think for themselves and who can be empathic and resilient. That's my final tip.
Thank you very much, Professor. Thank you. Thank you very much. Personally, it has been an amazing experience. I'm extremely thankful and honored to have been able to meet you. Unfortunately, only virtually at this moment, but I really look forward to meeting you in person once all of this chaos is over. And please count with me and all of us for anything that you may need. I'm going to hand over to Pierre so we can wrap up. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. It's been great. Now the future of contracting as the event is taking place the day after tomorrow. Various time zones, of course. There will be 2 times 3 hours on really interesting stuff going on, and in between sessions as well. So, is there anything, Tessa, you would like to say before? Again, I thank Claudia for this speech. And
I'm muted. I just want to maybe show everyone like the lineup we have. It's a pretty impressive lineup of thought leaders and experts from around the world. So you're gonna get a lot of insights, not just theoretical, but also very practical insights. And we're bringing some really creative aspect to this with some music and DJing and arts and graffiti. So it's going to be really a different type of experience for you to join, because this is not a regular virtual summit. This is something that we aim is going to help you not just gain the knowledge, but really start to put yourself in motion to create new contracts and new experience for contract management as well.
Thank you, Tessa. And I think that some of the questions that you raised, Claudia, they will indirectly be facilitated by boosting half of a world of people who are dealing with relations/contractings, because not too much has been done to boost that area yet. Thank you. Thanks all.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.